Ahoy everyone, Tightrope here, and today we're taking a look at the general balance changes made to COH3 in patch 2.2.5. Starting off with the general changes, and we're having a look at casemates. These are vehicles that don't have a turret and can only fire in a limited cone ahead of them. Now when you give them a right click drag command, you can actually see what that cone is, so that's where they can fire without having to turn to face the enemy. So it obviously varies a bit from vehicle to vehicle, depending on their range and exactly what that cone is. You can see, for the Archer, for instance, that's pretty wide as far as casemate style vehicles go. And then if you use their kind of lockdown abilities like the Stug D's Vet 1, now this will just show like all the time. Same story for sight main gun for the Martyr, for instance. Now you can always see the firing cone, might make it easier to position this. One thing that is a little bit interesting though is these casemates, though you can see the arcs, they do pretty much always tend to turn so that the enemy is right in the middle before shooting. So if we switch this to be an enemy, turn off sight main gun, right on the edge, you can see it turns back so that it is in the center. But turning on sight main gun doesn't. So just a little interesting kind of quirk. Breach has been tweaked in the situation where the enemy jumps out of the building before the explosion goes off. It will cause breach to go on cooldown. So we'll see how this goes here against this rifle squad. Breach. Move out. And then I jump out of this, and I've got a cooldown here. Looks like maybe 11 seconds, 10 seconds before I can breach again. So this definitely hurts breach on maps that have multiple buildings right next to each other, like Mignano Gap or Pacino Farmlands, because the enemy will be able to just jump out of the building that you're breaching, jump into the one right next door, and your breach was kind of all for nothing. But at least it doesn't cost you any munitions. A lot of you probably weren't aware of this, but infantry-held light machine guns, things like the Bar, Braider, SSF Commandos LMG they can swap into between their bazookas, or the Vickers that the Commando support section has, all those kind of infantry-held light machine guns that can transfer from model to model as the squad members die. They actually had different performance against units in cover compared to regular small arms. So having a look at the Garand on the rifleman, because this is about standard as it gets, you can see against heavy cover, the Garand does 50% damage and 50% accuracy, so should over the long term do 25% of their normal DPS compared to a unit that was out of cover at the same range. Garrison cover, the accuracy is slightly worse. The cover provided by garrison cover is slightly worse. But garrison cover does have some other benefits against some other damage types, so it's fine. It's only a small difference. Very, very similar. But yeah, against LMGs, that actually wasn't the case. Here on the right, these are the single player values. So these are like the old numbers before this patch. And we can see the change here. So previously, it only used to give a 30% damage reduction. This is garrison cover against these LMGs. But now it's a 40% damage reduction. No change to the accuracy multiplier, which I think was incorrectly noted in the patch notes. No change to the accuracy multiplier against garrisons. And then heavy cover is more of a difference. Accuracy has been decreased by 5%. So essentially, heavy cover now offers 5% better chance of dodging a shot from these LMGs. And then the damage has also received the same as garrison cover, improved by 10%. So 40% damage reduction now instead of just 30%. So these LMGs are going to be a little bit worse against units in cover, which, yeah, I think you'll probably notice, but a lot of people probably didn't even know about this. I was actually working on a guide about this before I got sidetracked doing all those Christmas wishlist videos, but I thought that was really important for me to make those videos with those changes. But yeah, this was what I was working on, because it is actually quite a lot different from Code 2. The numbers here vary a lot. There's some like unusual weapon types like autocannon, scope rifles and stuff. And mainly it was to illustrate this, because I think a lot of people didn't actually know about this. So yeah, The comparison I have down here at the bottom, small arms versus heavy cover, it's a 75% reduction, or the unit will be doing 25% of the normal damage, whereas previously against garrison cover, these LMGs were still doing, about just under 40% of their damage, which is 54% better damage than regular small arms, which is a pretty big difference. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, this doesn't change their performance against light cover. There was always a 0.5 accuracy multiplier, same as regular small arms. So light cover, it's not going to change anything, has to be heavy or garrison. Casualty clearing has been changed. This is the function on the US med tent and the Wehrmacht medical bunker, where the medic runs out onto the field, picks up a wounded soldier, brings him back. Used to provide you with a free reinforcement to the next squad that got reinforced next to the med tent, but now it provides you with 25 manpower instead. So not much of a difference if you're using a scout, 28 manpower reinforce cost there, but rangers 50, you're losing like half your value. So expensive US and Wehrmacht squads, things like Stoßtruppen as well, going to be much more expensive and going to be getting a lot less value out of these. And yeah, it has also been renamed. Now it's Casualty Recovery rather than Casualty Clearing. So let's see how this goes here. I'm going to kill squad. Hopefully one of these will become a crawler. The lag goes out. Let's see if we get 25 manpower. There is plus 25. All right. So your runner did make quite a lot of changes, with casualties now lasting for 2 minutes instead of 30 seconds in the previous patch, even though they dropped down to just one medic. Still was seeming to provide a lot of value, especially in 1v1. So I think this was a large part of US Forces' manpower advantage, because medics just didn't have that far to run to recover casualties, and it gave them a big edge over the span of a 20-minute plus game. So kind of tuning this down a bit. Heavy machine gun weapon teams have received quite a lot of changes in this patch, the most important of which is that now their setup time takes half a second longer to complete. So half a second longer before they can start shooting at the enemy. It's going to make, them just attack moving them around the map worse. Or if enemies like flanking, if you want to change angles, this gives more time for the enemy to get close. And probably be able to throw a grenade on you before it's able to start firing. So it's going to make quite a big difference to machine guns. It's going to make them overall quite a lot worse, and maybe increase the importance of having spotters for your machine guns, because otherwise you won't be able to set up quickly enough. On top of that, they increased the experience requirements by 40%. So big nerf to their vet gain. That's like a really big nerf. Their vet gain 40% more. But at vet 2, they now get a higher suppression bonus. Used to be 30%, now it's up to 40%. So I want to see how this goes. I'm going to turn the fog on. Going to get this squad running in here. Try throw a grenade on them. All this light cover in the way. See if this vet 2 machine gun with the buffed up suppression can stop them before the grenade comes off. It's just like a normal sight line. And this is the Vickers, which is kind of known for not being the best at suppression. That's why I chose this machine gun specifically. But they do manage to crawl in range just before getting pinned. And finally, heavy machine guns have also had their long range accuracy increased by 15%. So they do a bit more infantry damage at those ranges. Fortunately, I can't show you that in a graph because COH3 stats hasn't been updated yet. Light artillery units, the Packhauser, LAIG and heavy mortar have received a couple changes. First off, their experience requirements have been reduced by 15%. The AoE has also been slightly changed on the outer edges of their AoE. AoE far value has been increased from 15% up to 20% damage, so a little bit of a nudge there. They've also changed their projectile. So you can see here, firing above this building. It was really high. Maybe higher than it needs to, honestly. But if there's nothing in the way, just scoots along pretty similar to how it was previous patch. They also mentioned in the patch notes that the projectile speed was increased from 50 to 65, but definitely looks like this is flying slower, especially on these like low angle shots than it was last patch, at least to my eye. Light mortars have also been changed in this patch. First off, their veterancy requirements have been reduced by 25% or a little bit less in the case of the mortar half-track. We've also had a slight change to their veterancy bonuses. Their one used to give them plus 15 health, now it's plus 10% rate of fire, so they're going to be more lethal but a bit more squishy. Remember, they've only got 80 health, so will be quite vulnerable to counter barrages from things like Nebelwerfers after this change. Vet 2, they used to get a scatter bonus, which, if you remember from my veterancy overhaul guide, I thought that was a terrible idea because the scatter on their barrage was already so good, it just didn't matter at all for that. And the auto fire rate of fire is just so trash. A scatter bonus on that was just near irrelevant. So I called for a change back then, and here we are a year later. They've done it. They've given it 10% more damage now, Vet 2, instead of a scatter bonus, which was irrelevant. You may remember a couple of patches ago, they made it so the shell takes the same time to land, whether you're going long range or short range, and they've slightly increased that time to land by 1/8 of a second. I do want to say that still I think that the British Mortars Vet 1 ability entrenchment is just so bad. Requires like some thought to use in terms of, you know, how long it takes to set up and stuff. The bonuses from it are so weak, especially compared to all the other mortars. Like Airburst Barrage on the US mortar is really nice. The incendiary round on the mortar half-track is really good. The Wehrmacht mortar's flares is excellent. This is just like a 10th of the power level of all those other Vet 1s. So would like to see a change here. I know that they're trying to keep all the Vet 1s on Brit team weapons the same, but it just doesn't really make sense for this mortar. Suppression has been changed and now applies a much higher scatter and reload penalty than it did before, along the lines of what I requested in my recent video on COH3 changes that I want to see made to gameplay. So we're going to redo the test that I did in that video. These guys have been modified so they get suppressed but they never get pinned, so we can just see them in an extended fight, compare how they do against a Panzer IV, time to kill, stuff like that. Suppressed versus unsuppressed. So this guy starts shooting. They're also vulnerable. And here we go. So first strike, you would expect that to roughly be the same. But now the rate of fire, extra penalties starting to kick in a bit more. I think in my previous demonstration, the suppressed unit was only about 33% worse. But now that one's dead and this one's still above half health. So it's gone from like 33% worse to like, I don't know, like 65% worse. So much worse for all of these handheld weapons. They're going to be missing more with their scatter, either landing short or off to the sides. And they're going to be firing much slower. So yeah, it's going to affect things like bazookas, Shreks, grenade launchers, AT rifles. And you can see all of the penalties of being suppressed if you hover over the exclamation mark in the unit's status bar. Now testing the Shrek, suppressed versus unsuppressed, see how it goes. Cycle this a little bit because I haven't modded this guy yet. So I expect them now for the difference to kick in. Alright. Not as much as I remember it being in Code 2. I remember in Code 2, when a suppressed Shrek fired, it would be like 30-ish seconds before it could fire again. This seems to only be firing about half as fast, even though it says like a 75% reduction. So I don't really know how it's all distributed in the back end on the numbers, but it doesn't seem like it's firing a quarter as fast. Mobile anti-tank guns have had their fuel cost increased by 10 across the board. I don't think this is going to solve the problem of them overperforming, but it's something while we wait for a proper fix. Salvaging, which is available on some defensive structures like the fighting position or the Bofors. Now the salvage will get cancelled if it gets attacked during the salvage process. So let's see how this goes. Activate salvage. Swap this guy to enemy. Cancelled. And it's got a 2-minute cooldown after that, so you can't salvage again for 2 more minutes. I haven't used this too much, so I want to see how much resources I get back from salvaging fighting positions. It's on 10% health. Will I get 10-ish resources back? Or will I get 75? I get the full 75, even though it's at 10% health. That seems not so good. I think you should get back based on health percentage as well. There's been a change to the amount of experience certain units gain when capturing or decapturing territory. Previously, it was 100 XP to capture, 50 to decapture. Now that's been standardized to 75 XP for both. So this will probably mean those units will come online to Vet 1 later now, things like scouts and so on. Because all you're doing at the start of the game is just capturing territory. I suppose technically decapturing does take 5 seconds shorter, but most units have capture rate bonus and very few units have a decapture rate bonus, so probably ends up being similar time to capture and decapture for most units. The amount of extra manpower you generate by putting a cache on a strategic point has been reduced from +20 down to +15. And yeah, this was definitely extremely strong, especially in 4v4s. And if the strategic points were quite far back, which they can be in some of those maps, it was so good that I was even trying it out in 1v1s. You know, if my battle group had a cache discounter, and if the map was, you know, a little bit safer for me to put a cache down where the enemy wouldn't reach it, and it was like pretty reasonable. And that's just boosting up 1 player, let alone 4. So it just shows you how strong this change was. So good, they've reduced this. And they also mentioned in the patch notes that they're looking into ways to maybe make caches more available in 1v1s without, you know, boosting up all 4 players in team game modes, which I think is something they do need to look into, because I see maybe like 1 cache from my enemies like a month. Almost never happens. But in team games, they like feature in basically every match, right? And it's, I think, one of the big differences between 1v1s and 4v4s, because these just provide 4 times the benefit to a team. A big disparity makes them like unaffordable in ones, but really, really good in team games, and it can kind of distort the timings on when certain units arrive, or, you know, with this new manpower boost, distort the amount of units you can push out over the course of a game. This change has been included in the general section, but it only applies to rangers because they're the only ones who can fire handheld anti-tank weapons like bazookas on the move. They've had their moving performance for both scatter and accuracy nerfed by a pretty sizable amount. So if they're run and gun chasing a vehicle, they're going to be missing a lot more. So we're going to do a bit of a test here, chasing down a Panzer IV. See how they go. So obviously at this range you would expect them to be hitting. Seems like the Panzer IV kind of stuttering a little bit in its movement. It's slower to get away. But this is kind of range I expect them to start missing. Whereas previously they would probably be hitting there. I think a lot of this change is going to come down to the moving scatter nerf, because previously they probably were missing quite a few shots. But as we saw with the suppression change, the bazooka scatter is just so good that when scattering, we're still going to hit the targets anyway. But now with the much, much bigger scatter penalty, a lot more of those misses through the accuracy system are also going to be missing through the scatter system. I do want to talk about ranges a little bit overall, because indirectly they have been nerfed a lot this patch. Between this change, LMGs, which they can get through the weapon drops, their bars, M1919's performance against heavy and garrison cover, that's gotten nerfed. Manpower discounts that we haven't talked about yet, but through the infantry support center, they've been reduced by 5% and the XP gain has been eliminated. And of course, the changes to casualty clearing, whereas previously you might be able to reinforce a free model on a ranger for 50, Now it's only going to be giving you 25 health, and that applies to the frontline medical station as well. Rangers have got hammered this patch, and I would expect to see quite a lot less of them in this patch. And now some quality of life changes for handheld anti-tank squads. First off, the bazooka and Jaegers, they'll start out on prioritized vehicles now. Definitely a very good change for bazooka squads because they are terrible against infantry with their bazookas. They could barely do like 3 damage to them once a minute. You know, they are really, really bad against infantry. Panzerbuchse is quite a lot better against infantry, so not as relevant of a change on them, but it's also not a big deal, just turning it off. Similar change once you upgrade the Shrek on the Jaeger. They will go on to prioritized vehicles. Not the case though if I upgrade the Piet on the Canadians, they don't go on to prioritized vehicles. And finally, on the infantry section, upgrade with the boys. They also go on to prioritized vehicles, and they actually finally have, well, it's called focus vehicles, but I always call it how it's called in Code 2, prioritized vehicles. They finally have it, which they never had before. So it's a really nice quality of life change for them. So it's kind of like a sliding scale. I think bazookas, it's always good to have them on focus vehicles because they do basically nothing to infantry. I think the next worst is the boys AT rifles. Then I don't know, maybe the Shrek. Then I think the Panzerbuchse, and then the Piet's like the best against infantry. Shrek comes down to a lot to RNG because it can do some big damage, but it has a very low chance to hit. I'll be covering the faction-specific balance changes in my next video, but I got to get out of this room, guys, because it is hot in here, about 33 degrees. I'm cooking. I'll come back when it's a bit cooler in the evening. I need to get some airflow in here, open the doors, let some sound in again, and let some cool air in. But yeah, overall, pretty small balance patch. I think the Relic do tend to take quite a lot of time off over Christmas kind of period, so not a huge surprise, but it was like 2 months-ish. I don't expect the meta will be shifting too much of the changes in this patch. A big thank you to all of my Patreon backers, and if you want to support the continued production of videos like this, I hope you consider jumping on board.